Our thanks to our worship team today for leading us in worship and for all of our musicians and worship teams over the weeks. We sometimes take them for granted, but they lead us so well in our times of worship together. Let's begin with a prayer. Let us pray. O God, open our eyes that we may see, our ears that we may hear, and most of all, our hearts that we may understand. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Words. Words are all around us, aren't they? There are a lot of words out there, and they kind of come at us from many different directions. We live in a generation of social media, of cable TV and streaming, of 24-hour news, and there's lots of words. I mean, they come at us from TV broadcasters, from talk show hosts, political pundits, and even from preachers. And I know we have a tendency sometimes to want to shut it all down, to turn a deaf ear to it all, to just ignore it. That's not an invitation, by the way, to ignore the sermon for today. But you know what I mean. There's a lot of words out there. And it seems to me that when people are nearing the end of their lives, their words take on greater meaning. Now, maybe you've had this experience where you have gathered around a loved one who is in their final days, and you long to hear a word of wisdom, some kernels of truth that sum up a life of living and loving and learning. We know that Jesus uttered some final words when he was dying on the cross. We know them as the 7 last words of Christ. 7 phrases, actually, which he uttered. And I find it interesting that if you take those phrases all together, they probably form the most eloquent sermon that Jesus ever preached. I also find it significant that the first of those 7 last words is a word about forgiveness. Jesus is being nailed on the cross between the 2 thieves, and he utters a prayer for his tormentors. He says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Forgiveness. We all need forgiveness, don't we? And it's not an easy topic. Forgiveness is never easy. It's never cheap. It's costly. It's difficult. It requires something of us. It's incredibly hard work, but we so desperately need it, don't we? Last winter, or early spring, a few months back, I used an illustration about forgiveness in one of my sermons. And it's a story that bears repeating. And I tell you that so you don't think I'm losing it, that I'm repeating a story. But I do think it's a good story, and it applies to our topic for today. It was a short story by the famous writer Ernest Hemingway. A story about a father and son in 1930s in Spain. And the teenage son's name is Paco, and that's a very common nickname in Spain. And the father and son have this falling out, and the son decides he's going to run away from home. Paco heads off to the big city of Madrid. And he's always had a dream to become a matador, to fight the bulls. And he heads off. And a short time later, the father has second thoughts. He desperately wants to be reconciled to his son, but he has no idea how to find him. He goes to Madrid. The city is too big. But then he comes up with a rather brilliant idea. He decides to put a little ad in the local newspaper on the front page. And the ad simply says this: "Dear Paco, meet me at the Hotel Montana at noontime on Tuesday. All is forgiven. Love, Papa." And so the father rushes on the Tuesday to the hotel, and he gets there in front of the plaza, and he's shocked at what he sees. There are hundreds of young men lined up, all named Paco, all of whom are desperately seeking reconciliation and forgiveness. All of them. Some years back, I was privileged to make a trip to Israel to visit the Holy Land. And I remember we traveled with a group of pastors and their spouses. And when we were in Jerusalem, we visited what is known as the Holocaust Museum. In Hebrew, it's called the Yad Vashem. And it's a powerful experience. You go in there and you come out changed. It's very graphic, it's very emotional, but it's very powerful. And the name Yad Vashem in Hebrew literally means a monument and a name. And it comes from a passage in Isaiah 56, a verse which says, "I will give them a monument and a name better than sons and daughters." Now, the Yad Vashem was set up not to continue bitterness, not to promote hatred, not to seek revenge. The Yad Vashem was set up to remember the victims of the Holocaust and to work toward making sure this would never happen again. It really echoes the words of Jesus on the cross. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." C.S. Lewis once said, "Everybody thinks forgiveness is a great idea until they have something to forgive." I think that's true. The scriptures are filled with stories about forgiveness, are they not? Think about Joseph and his brothers. In an act of treachery and betrayal, they sell him into slavery. But 20 years later, Joseph is the one with power when the brothers come to him for help. And he could take out revenge, but he doesn't. He says to them, "You meant it for harm, but God meant it for good." And there's the story of the prodigal son, that wonderful parable where the waiting father looks down the road and sees the prodigal returning, and he runs to him and embraces him with forgiveness. Or the story of Jesus forgiving the woman caught in adultery. But the story I like the most about forgiveness in the scriptures concerns the Apostle Peter. You'll remember this story. Peter comes to Jesus one day and he says, "Jesus, Lord, how many times should I forgive my brother or sister when they sin against me? 7 times?" Now, Peter thought he was being extremely generous because in ancient Jewish tradition, the law stated you only had to forgive a brother or sister who sinned against you 3 times. The 4th time, you don't have to forgive. So Peter thought he was being really generous. "How many times should I forgive, Lord? 7 times?" And Jesus said, "No, Peter, 70 times 7. Now, those of you who are mathematically inclined will multiply that number and say 490. So on the 491st time, you don't have to forgive. But that's not the point, is it? The point Jesus is making is forgiveness should be unlimited. It should be unconditional. It should be lavish. It should be full of grace. There is a wonderful tradition that comes to us from the Eastern Orthodox wing of the church. And it says that as Jesus hung on the cross, drops of his blood went down and seeped into the ground, and seeped all the way down to the original bones of Adam and Eve. And it provided forgiveness for anyone who had ever lived from the time of Adam to the time of Christ. Now, this, of course, is only a legend, but theologically, I think it's true. Jesus has been called the second Adam. We know the first Adam brought sin into the world. Jesus, as the second Adam, brings the remedy for forgiveness of sin. Love often requires sacrifice. Next spring, when we get into the season of Lent, you will remember that purple is the color of Lent, the color of forgiveness and sacrifice. We ponder again these words of Jesus from the cross. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." I want to take a closer look at this saying today because each word or phrase teaches us something about Jesus. Notice the first word on the cross from Jesus, Father. Father. It's really a prayer, is it not? He begins by addressing God. His choice of word reveals his closeness to God. Jesus never addressed God in a lofty or formal way. He always used that more intimate word, Father. One scholar said that you could sum up the whole life and ministry of Jesus in that one word, the Hebrew word Abba, Father. Paul says much the same about our prayers in Galatians 4. He writes, "And because you are God's children, he has sent the Spirit of his Son in our hearts, crying, Abba, Father." There's a famous image from 1963, and it's an image of the former American President John F. Kennedy in his office, and it's at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And if you don't know what that was, you can Google it. I'm showing my age. But at the height of that crisis, he's in his office, and all of his staff are around him, and they're all looking very solemn. And whoever the photographer was captured a picture of his desk, and underneath his desk, playing there, is his 3.5-year-old son, John Jr. Amazing. Totally oblivious to what's happening, yet he was allowed in that inner sanctum by virtue of his father being the president. The Apostle Paul reminds us of who we are, God's children, and that we have access to him at all times. The next word from the cross is the powerful verb, forgive. Forgive. It echoes the words of Jesus in the other Gospels. In Matthew 6, he says, "For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." The theologian A.M. Hunter once said, "To return evil for good is the devil's way. To return good for good is the human way. But to return good for evil is God's way." As I said earlier, forgiveness is hard work. It's never easy. One translation of forgiveness has this phrase, to let go. To let go. It's not a bad definition of forgiveness. To let go of bitterness and hurt. Elizabeth Barrett was a Victorian-era poet, and her writings are quite popular here in the Western world. She married the poet Robert Browning, but apparently they wed in secret because her father disapproved of their union. When he found out, he never forgave her. For years, she wrote letters to her father seeking reconciliation. He returned them unopened. Perhaps if he had read them, perhaps if he had read the beautiful language, he would have been able to forgive. We will never know. But some people just hold on to that bitterness and spite. The only way to true freedom is to let go of our bitterness and pain, to let go of anger and malice. Jesus is looking up to God in his first word from the cross. And he's asking God to forgive his enemies and to forgive us of our sin. The next word Jesus uses is them. Father, forgive them. It identifies the object of his forgiveness. Now, who exactly is them? Who is Jesus referring to? Well, there's a number of possibilities. He could be referring to the soldiers who were literally crucifying him. He could have been referring to the religious leaders of his day that condemned him to death. He could have been referring to the disciples who all ran away except John. Maybe he was even referring to the bystanders who stood there watching. But you know, the word them also refers to you and to me. Romans 3:23 says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Looking beyond today's Gospels to the very next verse, the criminal mocks Jesus. Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us. Save yourself and us. It's a question we all ask, isn't it? Save us, Jesus. And that is what he does. God becomes one of us in Christ. He made himself vulnerable. He took on human flesh to be in our places of greatest pain. He showed us that love is stronger than pain, and hope is stronger than despair. As the apostle put it, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. The final part of Jesus' words from the cross today form a phrase, for they know not what they do. One of our biggest issues, I think, as Christians, is that we are not always aware of our sin. In David's great penitential psalm, Psalm 51, he writes, I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. We are not always aware of our need for forgiveness. Often we struggle to understand the meaning of forgiveness in our lives. The writer and preacher Fred Craddock tells a story of a 6-year-old boy whose mom asks him to stop running in the house. Very familiar story, isn't it, to most of us for young kids. And she says, you know, you might fall and hurt yourself or break something. Just stop running. Well, you know what happened. He kept running until eventually he broke a vase that fell to the floor. And his father happened to see it as it actually happened. And he picked up the boy and he said, don't worry about it, it's only a vase. The mother came in the room later. She looked down, started to pick up the pieces of the vase and said softly, it wasn't just a vase. It was my favorite. My mother gave it to me, and her mother gave it to her, and I was going to give it to my children. And she wept, and the little boy wept. And his mother took him in her arms and hugged him, and he hugged her back. And Craddock asked the question, who forgave here, the father or the mother? We need forgiveness, for we know not what we do. Forgiveness, you see, is always rooted in relationship to others. We struggle to understand sometimes who needs to forgive and who needs to be forgiven. The first words of Jesus from the cross talk about forgiveness. And the root of true forgiveness is the second chance. We all desire second chances in life, don't we? A second chance to say something different, or maybe not to say something at all. A second chance to repair a relationship or to make the most of an opportunity. A second chance to chase a dream or to follow through on a responsibility. We can probably think of many things for which we would like a second chance. Whenever I read the Passion narrative in the Gospels, I'm struck by how many chances there really are. Jesus forgives those who crucify him, the soldiers, as well as the religious leaders responsible and the bystanders. There is a thief on the cross who asks to be remembered by Jesus. Barabbas is given a second chance in a way, in that he is released instead of Jesus. The centurion at the foot of the cross confesses Jesus to be the Son of God. Peter is forgiven for his denial of Jesus. In fact, we are all forgiven and given a second chance in the symbolism of the curtain in the temple in the Holy of Holies being torn in two from top to bottom. The way to God is now open to all who believe. This is one of the key themes of Jesus' death and resurrection. We always have available to us new opportunities, second chances for life, for grace, for mercy, for forgiveness. It has been said many times that the purpose of our discipleship is to become more and more like Jesus. We are to be transformed by the Holy Spirit so that, as C.S. Lewis put it, we become nothing less than little Christs to each other and to the world. Our journey today begins with the words of love, the words of absolution, the words of second chance. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Let us pray. O God, we come today confessing our lack of forgiveness and grace toward others. Too often we are easily offended and we hold grudges. Show us that the only way to true freedom is by letting go of bitterness and anger. Help us to do the hard work of real forgiveness and reconciliation. We remember Jesus' last words today, and in particular his word about forgiveness. Remind us that forgiveness is all about second chances, about extending grace to others, and letting go of anything that hinders good relationships. May we always forgive, just as Christ has forgiven us. As we offer our prayer now in the name of the one who forgave and who continues to forgive. Amen.